Right, so welcome back to the finale of our Making of God of War event with Santa Monica Studio here at Gnomon School in Hollywood. So if you're joining us online, or you just arrived here at the stage and you missed parts 1 and 2, we'll be archiving the recordings once the event ends, so you'll have a chance to watch it later. So for those of you here, our Twitch channel is @Gnomon_school, and live stream is livestream.com/Gnomon, so you can see it in both those places. So we've learned about character rigging, cinematic animation work that went into God of War, and we went deep into those stunning environments of God of War as well. So now it's time to jump into the characters. So let's welcome lead character artist Rafael Grassetti and lead character concept artist Dela Longfish. So big round of applause. Thanks again to our sponsors, Lenovo and ArtStation, and again, huge thanks to Santa Monica Studio for making this possible. And again, Sony PlayStation, they've been rehosting us all night on Twitch, so that's super awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I believe Pixelogic may also be rehosting us at this point, so big thanks to our friends over at Pixelogic. We're going to see some seriously impressive ZBrush stuff, I'm assuming, so let's have another big round of applause, and we'll get started with the last presentation.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. I'm Raf. We're going to talk a little bit about the characters that we did for the game. I say a little bit because the game is really big, 30 hour plus.
Yeah.
We made hundreds of characters, and we don't have a lot of time, so.
I think our first draw one was about 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we edited it down a little bit, but you guys get the best of on this.
Yeah. So we're going to share a little bit of our process. It's a really fun project for a character artist. There's a lot of creatures. We have a lot of creative freedom in a project as well, so this is pretty special for both of us.
Yeah, and like was said earlier, like the work that you guys are going to see, what goes without saying, is the work of a huge team. So we have a huge biz dev team as well as a character team that none of this could have been possible kind of without their help and support.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that work on this. So, we'll start with the main guy, Kratos. Big challenge for us coming into the team, into the studio. We started about the same time, so you've seen some of these pieces that Luke showed.
Yeah, and these are done by Jose Cabrera. These are some of the first pieces that he did for the game that really kind of set the foundation for what we were looking for in the Norse world. I think not only did the look resonate, but on the character side, just the relationship between father and son. That really kind of was something that stood out to us starting this game.
Yeah, it was something that, coming from Corey, the creative director, was trying to show that relationship with the early pieces that Jose created. And he was working very closely with Corey before we joined the team. So when we joined, we had an overall idea of what the directors were looking for. This is another piece created by him early on. So it was really inspiring for both of us and the entire team when we joined the project. And we started creating a lot of the content based on these initial pieces. This is one of the first things that I did when I joined the project. I was trying to capture that relationship that we talked about. And again, just starting to break it down, some of the costuming work that Jose was doing that was resonating with a lot of people. So again, try to understand how that would work with maquettes. And we had some, more time on the pre-production, like Luke and Nate said. So that was a perfect time for me to come in and start creating these more physical assets that we can share with the team and that get everybody inspired.
Yeah, and this was a real quick way to just get people who aren't artists to kind of look at the team and get familiar with the characters. And then I did a piece kind of based on what Raf was doing on how that would actually look visually as we kind of went forward with it.
Yeah, and then this piece actually shows like some of the back and forth that we had early on in the studio of me sculpting something in 3D, trying to get an overall feeling with the assets, and then Dela would do like a concept on top. Yep. So you see a lot of that through the presentation.
I think that's kind of a hallmark of the studio between our departments is we use a ton of collaboration, so being able to work with each other, the back and forth, especially at that point when we were a small team, it really got us in a good space pretty quickly.
Yep.
And then obviously, we went through probably at least 100 designs for what Kratos could be. The nice thing about Kratos is we're starting with a character that's extremely iconic. When we talked to Corey, though, it's like, how do we want this character to look for our chapter of this game and of God of War?
Yep.
A lot of work was done, and as you can see in this, initially we thematically wanted to be like, well, what if he's represented by the bear and the son, the wolf, kind of playing up to their personalities and give us a few visual hooks to kind of cue off of. So we did a lot of 2D, but then also 3D.
Yeah, we did hundreds of these, and working with the team, we're trying to break it down again, some of the early pieces that we had, but we also were looking into how we'd make this into the game. And early on, we knew that he's gonna have upgrades and how we're gonna make everything work with the base costume that he was gonna be wearing. So a lot of this stuff evolved through the time, and we were just testing out a bunch of stuff that we knew it might not work for what we were looking for, but we just have to get it out there, get in front of everybody so we can cross that out of the options that we
Yeah, and the biggest thing we do on this when we're looking at characters, we basically want to give a sample platter for the director for options to pick from. And while all of this work was really good, one thing we kind of realized really quickly is we just completely covered up Kratos. We're already taking away the blades, which is iconic to him, but we want to bring those iconic elements back in, so we open up the design so we can see the tattoo on the chest, the scar, even giving some nods to like the Greek chapter of it. We actually made the axe hook that holds the axe, the Omega symbol as well.
Yeah, so you can see these are start to get closer to what we ended up with the final game. There's some great work done by Dela. And then from here, I took another take on the maquette, and I did an updated version with the costuming that was getting closer to some of the concepts that we had, and also looking at it as a product as well, how this work, looking for if we're going to manufacture something, or how just the overall feeling of the character.
And again, this is a great way, even before going into full 3D, that even people off team can really understand the character front and back and in the round.
Yeah, this definitely helps early on. I wish we had more time to, so I can keep making that. And then we did a lot of work on the face as well. Kratos' face changed a lot through the past projects. So we did put everything into together and start understanding what was his face, or what does the fans think that his face is. So then we start adding a lot of the realism back into the paintings, and again try to understand.
Yeah, and then even like Axel showed the proportions we went from the previous chapter into this chapter. We had some variance in that, and we actually did a whole round of taking that last one and moving it over to here. And I think what Raf and his team did great too is getting that brow, the bridge of the nose, all the things that still are iconic even within the face of the character. Yeah,
so I did a lot of different faces. This is probably the fourth or fifth one that updated through the game. And this I actually started with the assets from the past games. So we get also one step closer to what he used to look like, and then adding the wrinkles, adding the age through the character, and then of course adding the beard and see how that play up. Like he used to have a huge jaw in the past games, and I think the beard, since we brought him more to realistic proportions, the beard we try to add that back into the character. So playing with that was fun.
Yeah, and I think some of the stuff that Raf and his team did too is we're looking at the overall picture for the character, but even the smaller details as well, and to see the age in the face, to see the beard, even the way the body is modeled also by Raf, there's a little regret. He's kind of leaving a little bit of his past intentionally. He's got rid of the blades and all that. We want to reflect that in every inch of our character designs when necessary.
Yeah, so this is so closer to what he ended up looking at the final game. Of course, when you start playing with shaders, playing with texturing, a lot of things change, so a lot of the work is done also in engine to see how much you want to keep for that, how much you want to bring it back or exaggerate on the texturing. And we did the same thing for the body, like the aging process. We're trying with a lot of different body types just to see how much muscle we wanted to put in. We actually had like a fat Kratos early on with like a belly, and that evolved through the process. And Axel will show a lot of this on his presentation. I worked very closely with those guys to create the muscle system for the body. We try to really push the technology and get more of like what the movies are doing with some of these characters. So you see a little bit of some of the shapes that we created, and just trying to get the body to react. Even though we covered most of his body later on in the game, there was a lot of work done just to try to get to the next level.
Well, I think after the team saw this too, they're like, well, does he need anything on the torso?
Yeah. So it was a pretty fun process. It took a long time. We actually brought like an actor to the studio, captured his movements. We broke into a list of shapes, myself and Axel, to the shapes that we were supposed to be hitting, and then we reverse engineer, creating the corrections like Axel showed for like each pose. So the result is pretty nice. And again, this shows a little bit of the process for just how much weight or how much striation we want on the body, how much of a bodybuilding body he would have versus removing some of that just to show the weight and that he's more of a
Yeah, I think we
believable
put a little bit of that age in, and intentionally we didn't want the just yoked out, supercut character. I think just like the environments, we wanted like this kind of believable, relatable character in some sense. And then once we do the big kind of design elements, the team will go into all the really fine details and make sure all those costume elements have their own designs. And what we're trying to do even within those is seed kind of the Norse look and aesthetic back into it. And then this is something, again, that really helps when we hand it off to the modeling team to understand that stuff.
Yeah, so this kind of shows a little bit more of the back and forth that we talked about. So there's a lot of collaboration, so things are moving forward. And so this is a little closer look to what he ended up looking in the game, closer to what the first E3 when we revealed him. So it's a lot of work on the texturing also, because we showed just a little bit of the high-res stuff, but there was quite some work on texturing shaders and all that stuff.
Yeah, and this was actually nice. We actually got to go to the Sony conference when they had the reveal of God of War in 2016, and this was the costume that was there, and it was great being there with the fans to kind of see the reception that the game got, and we were kind of on a high for a day.
Yeah, it was very, getting the reactions from the fans and actually seeing that people were actually liking the character was pretty special, and we didn't have to redo a lot of work after that.
I said we were on a high for about a day, then we went right back into creating the rest of the game for Kratos. After we got that base costuming done from, we wanted to also give him kind of upgradable costumes. This is the speed offense and defense, and what we always try to do is pull from the narrative and the story with any kind of character designs. So as we have the more grounded, believable, relatable costume, as you go deeper into the mythology, that the costume actually follows that arc of the story. So we have a visual arc that matches the narrative arc within the game.
Yeah, and then in the production, it was pretty challenging for us to just understand how we're going to make all this work. Everything is swappable. You can mix and match things. And then working with our cinematics, like you guys saw on the cinematic presentation, the one-shot camera, we had a lot of constraints with that camera of like blocking views and things like that. So big challenges for everybody.
Yeah, like Ralph was saying, that's one thing I think as a concept artist, the perception is we just go in and create this great work. What we actually need to do is most of the time be problem solvers and really see how it works with the game, works with the combat. And this was an example of, the task was design 12 unique sets of armor. So great things we kind of rely on is shape change, proportion change. With our cut camera, to respect what Erica's team and Dory's team is doing, we had to design all these basically inside the silhouette. So kind of what you're taught character design, we had to kind of abandon that. And I got to hand it to the team. They took that challenge and really kind of stepped up and made some great suits that you never would realize that kind of those restrictions were there when we designed them.
And you can see some of the stuff that Dela mentioned about all the mythology. These are the final sets for each of the options you have in the game, and you can start seeing some of the characters that we have in the game being represented in the armor. Like you see the Wolver, some of the stuff with the dragon, the ogres on the defense. So we try to play up these elements just to make it easier for us to design, easier for us to present to directors and people to understand what's happening. And there's some work done by the character team. Eric Valdez actually sculpted all these armors. And we had, it was a lot of work. We had hundreds of different armors and combinations. So big props to the character team and the character tech art team just to, rig all that stuff. So quite some work there.
And then, of course, we got a new addition to the game. Kratos has a son, Atreus. So when we started designing Atreus, some initial talk was like, if Kratos has a kid, of course he's going to be yoked out, buff, big, kind of chip off the old block. But we intentionally wanted him to be a little more vulnerable and a little bit of the opposite of what Kratos is. So we wanted him to still have this innocence and where Kratos could kind of be a little cynical about the mythical world. To Atreus, it's all wonderful. It's all fantastic. It's all new. And then we also, with Atreus, his mother's from Norse, his father's from Greece. So we wanted to play more of that Norse look inside of the Atreus design.
And you can start seeing some of the influences from the mother and the father into the costuming. We start playing with elements like that, like the Spartan skirt from Kratos. You can see, make its way in some of the elements, and then the yellow from the mother. So we try to, again, use the narrative and to try to design some of that. You see some of the early, these are some drawings from the illustrations by Jose, and then this is some of the stuff that was staying with the team and with Corey. So we started breaking it down the face, and Dela did a lot of work trying to understand what's resonating with people, what we're trying to bring it back to, because we didn't know who was going to play him at this time. And again, we also did a lot of exploration in 3D, just trying to understand how we can build this and how we can actually like manufacture some of his costuming. And playing up with some of the archer style as well, since we knew he was going to have a bow and arrow. And you can see some of this in this, some of these concepts. And then when we got Sunny to play him, then it kind of helped us a lot more into understand who the character was. And then we actually scan him like Axel showed. And even with the scanning process, we go back and characterize him. So we start adding some of the story that we knew that was going to for the character, so you can see some of the scars, tweaking the shape of the face to show more of the innocence, like Dela said.
And even things like this, like we do so much like backstory and talking between all the groups about who these characters are, even though we've got the realistic sculpt here, it looks beautiful. They also add the element where he's got the blue eyes. We want him to be ice and Kratos is fire. So even in this, there's still those little elements of storytelling that are there. And again, this is where we arrive at the final design, a piece Raph and I did. Like you can see at the waist, he's wearing part of Kratos' old costume that he picked up, and then around the neck, he's wearing yellow, which is his mother. He's in between both of them, and the influences on him kind of show as you go throughout the game.
Yep.
And once we design the front, a big part of games is we'll actually see our heroes from the back more than we will from the front. So we make sure that the back holds up. And then on the bottom, another thing we do, just kind of more internally, is to make sure that the character reads and the design's working out, is not get down to this real low level of detail. So it's almost like flat graphic shapes. We know if the design holds up there, once we have the detail, it'll be just as strong. We can also evaluate if he holds up in light and dark situations. There's a lot of snow in the game, a lot of dark areas. So even to mitigate that, we also gave the yellow color to his quiver, which actually comes in on the back as well.
And then some of the stuff that we were playing early on was the wolf and the bear, like Dela said at the beginning. So you can see we're actually like seeing who was gonna use each color, just so we're kind of playing up in the game and seeing how that was reading. The kid is usually far from you most of the game, so he was gonna use the more bright colors, and that's how we arrived on that. And you can see the final model that ended up in the game, and again, a lot of work on even creating the fur, developing that technology, a lot of work done by Chris Gillett and myself on this. So, again, this took a long time just to arrive on this. And from this, again, we start looking at all the upgrades. So you see, start playing up with, how his markings on the body, how we could maybe use that to show some of the upgrades. And of course, the armors.
Yeah, and just like with Kratos, his armor upgrades were not as complex, but we also wanted to kind of see the mythology into the elements. But we also, one thing we're always trying to do to make it believable is basically still have those Norse elements kind of visible as well. For Luke, it's kind of like the chocolate and the peanut butter, the grounded, and also kind of the creative side. When we get those both together, I think it's when we find something special in our designs.
And then this is like the final version of probably hundreds of different armors that we did. And this, again, it was a little easier for us because we didn't have to mix and match a bunch of armors. So on the VizDev side, we have more creative freedom to just push it a little bit more than Kratos was and break it a little bit more. So you can see a little bit of the stages. Same thing for Kratos. As you get closer to the final upgrade, you start getting more of the mythology. You start seeing more of the creature that we use as influence for each armor. And then we kind of use the same thing as Kratos, the dragons for speed, ogres for defense, and wolvers for offense.
Offensive.
And then there's some work done by Igor, also amazing character artist on the team. So a lot of this stuff was pretty nice and really fun to work on for him, not for me.
And then obviously we also have some new weapons. A big part of it is Kratos no longer has the Blades of Chaos, so he has a new axe, the Leviathan axe, which is a frost axe, kind of pulling from the Norse landscape. And we initially went with some very basic axes. Like we wanted, hey, let's go really realistic, and then we realized it just didn't give us the visual drama we wanted. And then so these are some pieces done by Yefim Kligerman, and the last one by Vance Kovacs. They started putting the skill tree in the top of the blade, and initially that was going to be our skill tree, but we didn't want to limit it, so we took it off, but the staves still remained.
And a lot of this stuff is driven by gameplay mostly, so even when we are designing, they're still figuring out how that's going to be or what features they want to keep in the design, so you can see a lot of explorations that did end up making to the game, but elements of it make it through. And we also do a lot of exploration with the effects, so the effects team know what to look for, and we can art direct them in a way that's consistent throughout the entire process. So Yefim did a lot of these early explorations, kind of using the Norse patterns to see how that could play up in the design.
Yeah, we put a lot of kind of love and dedication into this weapon, especially because I felt we needed something that kind of held the weight of what the Blades of Chaos were for the character, because it was such a part of who he was. And then again with this is some explorations I did on how the axe can upgrade. One thing that we did to make the axe just kind of as special is give it its own history as well. Kratos is not the original owner of the axe, it's Atreus' mother. She's represented by a falcon in the color yellow, so as we upgrade it, you can actually see where the bird forms start to come into the blade more, and yellow starts to come into the design of the axe. Again, it's kind of just that visual arc mirroring the narrative arc.
Yeah, so you can definitely see the falcon coming in, and also like the ice trolls as well, so since they were used as part of to make the weapons, we start adding some of these elements into the design. So you see a lot of that throughout every design that we work on, a lot of the narrative and how we can add that to our pieces.
And then we also gave Kratos a shield, the Guardian Shield. And of course, Kratos uses a shield more as an offensive weapon, and just like all the weapons we have, it has a mythical element, so it actually folds up and condenses on his arm, and then he can open it up instantaneously.
Yeah, so that was a big challenge for us, just to see how we can make that work, and being, not making it expensive with the way that we could build this thing. So I did this prototype at the bottom left, and of course, Axel's team loved me when I gave that to them. It's, like, build this now. But it was a pretty fun challenge for all of us, and a pretty big surprise.
Yeah, and this was just the final design from Vance Kovacs, and of course, since we see the back of that shield more, we wanted to get that red in there, just that callback that is still related to Kratos. And then also the son has his bow and arrow. We intentionally started out with something that almost felt handmade with all of our designs. We almost wanted to feel like you could feel the person that made it in it. That gave us more contrast when we kind of got to the more fantastic ones. So he upgrades the bow throughout it. And one of the things we tried to do is his bow has sockets just like the axe. Even the chisel through the giant's head has a socket. So you feel like the smiths that made the weapons in the world are all the same, so they still have this continuity. And we did bring the blades back. We said spoiler alert earlier?
Yeah, of course. This is some early work done by Dela and his team, and just trying to get, and Chris as well, and the character team, so that collaboration going. Just try to understand what is the next step to the blade and how we can add a little bit of a new touch to, iconic weapon.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff I was starting to do is just see how it feels if we bring it into a little more of the realistic side, but even I think some of this stuff was maybe a little too stylized as we went forward. Yefim Kligerman actually came on and picked up the blade design and got us to the final design of what we wanted. Not only did he do the final Blades of Chaos, but we knew we wanted these to upgrade as well. He started, when our blacksmiths in the game start to upgrade it, they start to add more of a Norse flavor. So even though we've got the Greek history to it, the Norse starts seeding in a little bit as we go along. Yeah,
and same thing for the skill tree. That's why you start seeing more of that as the dwarves upgrade it and making it more Norse. You can see some of the carvings on the blade of the blade of the blades. And talking about these guys, so these are the dwarves that upgrades your weapons in the game.
Yeah, this is Brock and Sindri. They're basically our blacksmiths in the world. They made the axe, also Thor's hammer, so you can tell why the axe actually has the callback. It's similar from something that we actually go to the Norse mythology for. One thing we always try and do is show what the character is about in the design. It's better for us if we can show that instead of telling it, so that these guys are blacksmiths. You can actually see in their costumes all the fine work that they actually do is they wear on them.
And the personalities, they have a very different personalities in the game. So we also try to show a little bit of that in the design. You see Sindri is very clean, very ornate.
A little more elegant, likes the finer things, those nice details. And Brock, who's been working with metal so long, his skin's turned a little blue. He's more the meat and potatoes, getting the forge, hammer out the weapons.
Doesn't care too much about his armor. And then you can see this is some early explorations I did in ZBrush as well. Again, trying to get the personality, see how we can get their faces to speak what the design or even what we got from the narrative. And then from that, there's tons of work by the tech team, getting their faces to move correctly, and then a lot of work on the materials, a lot of work in ZBrush and with our material editor. and this is the final model in the game.
And these characters were fantastic. When you see what like Axel and Erica's team does, it really just brings them to life. We got the scripts early on, and like these guys are fantastic. They kind of really stood out. And then we made a brand the way that Brock, the blue one, explains to Kratos about the axe. He's like, if you look, my brand's on your axe. And the brand here on the top is when they were together, and they've actually split in our story. So when they split the brand themselves. We wanted a brand that worked together as a whole, but even when it was in its separate pieces, it still felt like each of the character. The small fire is Brock, and the more elegant curves of the dragon is Sindri. So we kind of add all those little things in there. It's a small detail, but I think it all pays off.
Yeah, you can see this throughout the entire game. This became kind of almost like a mark to the project, so it was a really fun little piece to work on. And then we added the beast, so it was pretty fun too. And it's a good example of how the VizDev helps drive some of the game elements as well. Like he wasn't supposed to be part of it initially, but then when the narrative team saw some of the work that we were doing, like everybody got inspired, and it made its way into the game.
Yeah, and this was a great thing too, since we weren't going to where the dwarves live, just showing these creatures that come with them. That almost implied that there's a bigger story or bigger land with them. And this was the idea that Jose had, since we'd see them throughout the world with their brands and their equipment, that they actually carry their shop with them. You can see everything is anvils, forges, all in there.
Yep. And you can see some of the work done by the character team. Glauco and Igor did most of the work here, and it turned out pretty impressive, pretty special in the game.
And again, just the finer details, we'll even go and design their brands, their hammers, their anvils, their billows, and make sure each one fits for that specific character. So there's a lot of fun in the big stuff, but even the small stuff at the studio.
And trying to keep that consistency throughout everything is pretty important. And then we go, talk a little bit about Baldur, which was a pretty big challenge for all of us.
Yeah, Baldur's our main villain in the game. He's kind of like our painted man. In the mythology, he's invulnerable, no one can kill him. And the way we took it in the story is that that's actually been a burden for him. Because of that, he can't feel anything. He loses that kind of back and forth with emotions. So over time, it's turned into anger and resentment for him. So that's kind of what drives him in our game. One thing, talking with Corey, he wanted basically this pantheon of gods to be different than the previous one. Is he kind of had this influence that they almost feel like bikers. They don't stand on pomp and circumstance. They're not ornate. When they come into an area, they're there and they mean business, and there's no monologuing with these guys.
Yeah, and some of the stuff that you talked about in his background, we actually translated into tattoos as well. A lot of the curse that he had, we try to tell that as a story in the tattoos, and it was a pretty big challenge for us to create that and reproduce all those tattoos on his body. And he went through the same process as Kratos for like muscle deformation and all that, and you can see some of the work that ended up in the game. Pretty big challenge, from the fur, from the beard to the tattoos, the skin shader, muscle deformation, the healing that Dela mentioned on the fights. There was a lot of people worked on this.
And then that was one thing too, I think, when the actor came in, they just added it to it as well.
Yeah, early on we didn't know that Jeremy was going to play him, but we tried to show some of that on his the early designs. And then when the actor came to us and we started scanning his face, actually help bring some of the personality back into the characters.
That's almost great at the studio. We'll start with the VizDev, we kind of go to the modeling, we go to the animate, and each part really elevates what we originally thought it could be at the first time, and I think that collaboration is what yields that.
Yep. He rides a dragon, of course.
He rides a dragon. So yeah, and then each fight we knew we'd be fighting him 3 times. We wanted each one to be different. So not only does he ride a dragon, but I think in the scene, the dragon almost becomes part of the arena that you're fighting him on. Dragons were something that was new to the mythology. We hadn't done a lot of dragons in the past chapters, so this was great. A lot of time spent on dragons. We don't have time to show that stuff here, but it was fun.
Some great work done by Vance Kovac on this piece, and then later Stephen Oakley, which is one of the VizDev guys, started working with Zach Berry, who was one of the character guys. There was a lot of back and forth just to break this down into how we can fit this armor into a dragon that we had already made into the game. So there was a lot of, and also, like Dela mentioned, this becomes part of the fight. So there was a lot of work trying to understand how we can make this work up close, how Kratos could walk on this thing. So it was a lot of work.
Another thing we'll do on the VizDev side is we work closely with combat for the mechanics for all the characters. Sometimes they'll come to us and say, hey, we have an idea. Other times we'll come up with a few ourselves, mainly just for inspiration. Sometimes, it yields something nice, but this was some of the work that Stephen Oakley did in the fight.
Yeah, you can see how some of that makes its way into the game and saves some time in productions because we can go straight to some of the strongest ideas that people like.
Yeah, and then we also kind of talk about making sure that the way they fight or move matches who their character is as well.
Yeah, so a lot of work done by the team here, destructibles. The healing part was pretty important. We did a lot of research on how we could pull that off. A lot of material work, triggering blood, triggering cuts and things like that. You can see more of the dragon. So it's part of the fight.
Yeah, then we have Freya, who's a really important character in the game. She's a goddess, also the wife of Odin. And when we find her, she's been banished to Midgard. She's originally from Vanir, from Banheim. And these are some pieces by Vance. I think he did some really nice work here. He even did this nice little thing of had this idea that Odin was still kind of keeping an eye on her, so you can actually see where she's killing the ravens that Odin has sent to watch her in the piece. And the Vanir are very connected to nature, so we really wanted her design to be influenced by nature.
Yeah, and then same thing for all the other characters. The face was, again, very important since she's the main character. So we did a lot of exploration, how to get a strong female in this new mythology.
Yeah, we wanted someone who could stand toe-to-toe with Kratos, wouldn't be afraid of him, and
so that's a big challenge.
was an equal.
And you can see some of the close to final concepts done by Vance and the team. And there's a lot of good stuff here. And then from this, we start getting and doing more material breakups and how, getting references for the character guys so they can understand how to build this stuff and, what materials he's using, his thinking. So it's almost like a material sheet.
Yeah, and another thing, again, like on this one, we pulling from the narrative, is there's a relationship between her and Baldur. If you've played the game, she has these very faded tattoos on her arm. And by the end of the game, they're very opaque, so you actually see that both bodies are tattooed to give that visual continuity between the two characters.
Yeah, and this is some of the high-res work done by myself and Chris. And there was a lot of work just to get to this point, getting the hair shader and building that tag from the beginning as well. And then this is a little closer to what she looks like in the game. So it's a big challenge, even for all the departments. And again, the face, I did probably 5 or 6 different faces that kind of evolved throughout the game until Corey was happy with some of the, with the work. He was very specific about what he wanted on the character, so it took some time to get to this.
And speaking about that kind of connection to nature, she also has connection to the natural life. This is some work done by Stephen Oakley. This is the turtle creature with Freya. It was definitely an interesting design element. We wanted something that could work in stages, like you just see the tree at first, then the turtle, and she has a house that she lives under it in. So it was a lot that went into it, and Stephen did a great job. I think it's actually the first thing he did, first week.
Yeah, and that guy just does hundreds of drawings, and this is just a little bit of, again, how the style, different artists work on different styles, and some of the character guys have preferences of what works best for them, so there's a lot of creative freedom in the studio.
I think one thing I try and do too is just allow time for sketching. It's not the most common these days, but still trying to allow that. I think someone like Steven, he's just a tsunami of ideas, and the way he can generate it's the quickest way he can do it. So what it gives us is a great...
And how the VizDev also influences the game again. There's some idea driven by the art department, and it kind of makes its way into the game. Really fun piece to work on. And you can see the final result in the game. As you approach the house, the turtle, like initially you don't know that, now you guys know if you haven't played the game, but yeah, she lives under the...
And the great thing for us too is this was the first character that we actually start to see that God of War scale. It was great, kind of felt like the old feel of the game. Another thing that was important to us, that we designed a world where not everything felt like it was there to kill you. We wanted that interest in there. There were things that were friendly, and to build out a world that hopefully we can go back to sometimes.
And that ties up into this big guy, which was the review on E3 was to get people to ask that question. Is he gonna fight me, or is he my friend? And we did a lot of kind of play up on that.
Yeah. So these are some sketches by Stephen Oakley. Again, what we do is we'll start with what we get from the director or mythology, and then we'll just go really wide on it. And sometimes we know it's going too far, but at least for us, that gives us kind of the boundary of what we're working within. Right. And there's a lot of things that we'll look at and like, man, these are great designs, but it doesn't serve what the story needs are or what the narrative or the gameplay mechanics are. So while we have some great designs there, the decision was made to go back to the snake look a little bit to still have that kind of a little more prevalent in the design.
And there's some work done by Jose as well. Again, you see the different styles, how things work. Some stuff, it's better for directors to understand, but the sketches that Steve does for us as a team helps us understand more what we're looking for, and we can move a lot faster into some of the decisions. And then this is closer to final. It was a big collaboration between the character and the concept team just to understand, again, with the scale, how much we could actually do, and then the facing part of it, the face of the snake talking, and all that stuff. So it was a big balance in how we can push the look, but then give us what we were looking for the gameplay.
And make sure it works at that scale, too, when we see it in the camera.
Yep. It was a big challenge. The perspective was a big challenge for this, because you would see the snake from close, and then you actually couldn't tell the shape. So we had to kind of play with the perspective on the creature's face, so it works for the camera. See some of the work done for the high res. And this was a big balance between how much detail we put on the high res versus how much we actually use on the tiling textures in the game because of the scale. And you can see the review part as well. We had to put a lot of detail in some of the parts of the snake. There's some amazing work done by the character team, myself, Glauco, and Igor. And this axe will show a little bit of the emotions from some of the initial tests that we did for the snake. And then this is me creating some of the shapes that later the tech team would put it in the game and hit those shapes so the snake could talk to you. So it's really, really fun challenge for all of us. And the results, it's pretty special in the game. And for this, like Nate said, we couldn't afford a lot of topology into the snake because she was part of this much bigger environment. So then I had to put a lot of the topology into the scale, so when the thing will move, it would actually contract and emote without seeing a lot of the stretching. So you see the scales when you would hold up the shape as the things were moving.
And Mimir, from mythology, he's the wisest of all the gods. He went against Odin and didn't come out on the winning side. So Odin's kind of imprisoned him in this tree. Odin didn't kill him since he is so wise. He still goes to him for his counsel. And to make sure that he tells the truth, he's actually put charms and tattoos on him. That means that he can only speak the truth to Odin. This is some work from Vance Kovacs and myself. Vance actually had the design with the horns, kind of added that element so that the character held up while he's in prison in this tree, but then also when he's just the head, making sure the design works in both states.
Yep. And this was done by Eric, and it was a collaboration between him and the environment team because parts of the character actually live in the environment. So again, the different departments working together, we do push a lot for that collaboration and people to go talking and see what techniques they're using because we do use different techniques to build environments and characters. So there was that back and forth again inside the studio.
And then we have the DRAUGRs, which are kind of like our multiplicity enemy. They're what the equivalent of like what the Skellies were in the previous games.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
And then once we're designing our enemies, another thing we have to think about is making sure that designs don't overlap, that different groups feel unique. So we'll break them into factions and make sure we'll give a little principles or rule sets per each of those. On the top here, you can see again that graphic breakdown, like how do they hold up, just at a low level of detail. We put a lot of time into this, and it kind of influences and gives guidelines as we're working on the characters.
Yeah, it helps everybody just to keep that consistency from textures that we put on the characters, effects that the characters use, and again, just the silhouette shape, so you can see the variations, the variety that we have in the game.
So the DRAUGRs, again, we knew this would be a big one, so we're looking at their kind of undead, how they look if they were just spirits, or there's a thing called the Blood Eagle. What if their spirit enters and it breaks the back and you get what the Vikings know as a Blood Eagle? Of course, just the undead. Also on this one, if you look at on the left, is just your classic zombie Viking. In the center is if all the flesh has gotten off and if he kind of comes as bones. And then as we started to go, it started to kind of refine. These are some works by Vance Kovacs. We went with the idea that their spirit is so strong, it'll go back and find its own body and kind of have this unnatural rebirth, but in doing so, it basically splits the body. So you can see fractures in their faces, their weapons, their armor.
Yeah, and it was trying to get that skeleton look and undead zombie without doing the cliche version and the narrative part of the splitting and getting the metals and flesh kind of fused and split together, that's kind of what gave us.
And I think we even have the thing where they even don't breathe. It's just the spirit moving the body so much that you don't even hear them breathe.
Yeah, that's why you see some of the souls on the early ones, because we were playing with the idea of the soul coming back to the body. And that's closer to what Dela did and what we ended up in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a final design.
And then the lava element actually came in later as the gameplay progressed.
Yeah.
And we, again, knew what was, how we're going to fight these guys and the effects and what gameplay requests we had. Then those elements start making its way into the design. You see some of the final models that we ended up in the game. We made hundreds of these guys, so the team actually worked on quite a lot on them.
Then we have the elves. This was a really cool character, I think. One thing I like about the elves is they're not as elevated as gods, but they're still above humans, so they've got this really weird middle space, which I think is super appealing. And just like in the pieces that Luke did, where the trees are just reaching for the light, the characters are basically doing the same thing. Both the light and the dark elves are kind of reaching for that light, and that's where the war is actually happening between the two characters. With this, again, we wanted to do something that was a little, hoping that we get something that's unique in our own designs. It feels a little more Norse with elves. Elves is a popular character that's been done a lot. With the one on the left here is almost feeling like if they're ghosts or spirits, and layering a lot of like what Luke and his team did with like the temple designs. You see that color palette coming through. And then the dark ones on the other side are kind of more natural, more frenetic, but they still, even their wings look like tree branches. And we also kind of have this backstory. If you actually look at their designs, they have the same striations in their skin. The light ones actually have horns. They just wrap them so it looks like a headpiece. So on second look, they're actually a little closer than maybe the two of them want to kind of admit.
Yep. And then layering those more realistic materials and trying to get, even though we go towards more of the fantasy stuff, how do we bring it back to the realism part of it? So we start doing researches on a lot of different materials and more of a tribal kind of look.
Yeah, and then this is, the Valkyries were, this probably ended up being like one of my most favorite characters in the game. Vance Kovacs and Justin Sweet did a lot of work on this. They kind of set the direction and basically what the final would be. The Valkyries in our game are basically from mythology. They shepherd the souls from Midgard to Valhalla, the ones that are worthy. And they kind of have this element where they almost feel like they're reapers looking for the souls. One thing that Corey wanted us to do to make them feel unique, instead of having just natural feather wings, that once they're chosen to be a Valkyrie, Odin actually gifts them a harness of wings. So their wings are actually mechanical. A lovely thing that Justin and Vance both did is made that work and feel like it was like period specific. It's so easy to make that look like sci-fi or tech. They actually went in the parts that almost feels like old rusted swords or things like that, and I think it's a real nice element to the character.
And you can start seeing elements of how they actually use their magic, of how they manipulate the Bifrost, and that play a big role into the design as well. And you can see some of the stuff that Dela was saying of how we can make the wings feel mechanic and how they can actually use that. So it's a lot of exploration how we can pull that off. And same thing, how we can actually build that in-game.
And I think one thing, too, that we wanted with these characters, for them to be scary and frightening, not horrific. And I think they hit a really nice balance of something that's frightening, but at the same time, beautiful. And, there's a lot of detail in the suits, but then they're still scary at the same time.
Yeah, and you can see some of the work done by Igor as well. And then Vance Kovacs did an amazing job at finalizing the look, and then building that was a different beast. Creating this as a game asset, making the wings as a kit that we could reproduce and not make it that expensive. There was some awesome work done by Igor.
And the nice part of it too, like when you actually come across them in the game, the wings actually became part of the way they attack, so even their combat feels so nice based on the look of the character.
And then expanding from the first one is how do we create 9 Valkyries that can not add months into production. Mm-hmm. So that was a big challenge. And then the VizDev, we actually started using more of the animals for each of the helmets. And so these are the final Valkyrie helmets.
Yeah, so we had all 8 of the animals. We kind of themed them out, and to make the queen feel the most elevated on there, she's based on like a mythical creature. And then the golden materials, even though it's a similar character, kind of get that hierarchy in the design.
Yeah, so it was really fun to work on these guys. And some of the work done by Mike Sons, and then the Queen Valkyrie done by Igor. And then we started playing a lot with the materials, how we can make all 9 of them look different. So there was a lot of work in the engine as well, trying to understand. We did shoulder pads. We started adding things that we knew was not going to be really expensive, and we made a lot of variations between all the Valkyries. You can see a little bit of how they ended up looking like in the game. And again, when animation came in and add all the motion, and you can see a lot of the combat, actually they're using the wings to combat. So it's a pretty special character.
Yeah, it was great seeing all this stuff come through. Every step of this just kind of kept pushing what the character was.
Yeah, and easy to fight.
Yeah. I'd say fight all 9 first before you do any of the main story stuff.
That was a pretty fun challenge for us, and that's how you kill them.
And like we said, we weren't able to talk about all of the characters, obviously, but here's a look at our full lineup of characters that we have for the game.
And this is just a small lineup that we have, just showing a little bit of the cast, and it's awesome for us just to see that at the end and see how much work was done by the team. Was pretty amazing. We didn't even talk about the trolls. We have lots of trolls in this game.
Yeah, we had a whole lot of other stuff to bring up, but next time.
That's it, guys. Thank you.
That was amazing, guys. Thank you so much. So we actually have 15 minutes for questions this time, so we can get through quite a few.
We practice.
Let's go. Joseph, you asked one last time. I'll come back if there's time.
Actually, we didn't practice.
Hello. So talking about the weapons, in terms of like decoration, when you guys were creating these weapons, I know that they're pretty elegant looking in a way, but also rugged. How did you guys think about that in terms of functionality? Was functionality like a huge thing, or was it something not really like thought about too much? Because I saw that there's like tons of decorative handles. Is that something that you thought about when creating them? Like, how would these characters actually use them? Would this get in the way, or is it distracting, or, you know?
I mean, the big part for what we need to do is make sure that, gameplay comes first. If something looks good but doesn't play well, then it's kind of a failure on our side, so we want to make sure that we avoid that at all costs. At the same time, we want everything to look good within that kind of part of it. What we did when we looked at the art direction is we wanted things to feel believable, so they almost felt like, okay, you could feel the hammer marks in them, you could feel that handmade part. They're not super ornate, but then we started to like put that in a little bit, and we kind of made that like the secondary element to it, so it still felt special. And some of the weapons, like the axe, we definitely wanted to see the workmanship from the blacksmiths. When you look at something like the DRAUGRs, we intentionally wanted those to feel really crude. Like, they're not going to cut you nicely, it'll more like kind of rip through something. So we also based the look depending on which character had the weapon.
And that stuff evolved through the project as well. We had initial guidelines from gameplay that we had to follow, and then as they were, fleshing out all the mechanics, then we kind of go back and add those stuff in. But all the upgrades and things like that were just happened through the entire project. So we're working on this nonstop.
Yeah, and our day-to-day is usually like, hey, here's 30 designs for the weapons, and then we sit and talk, and we talk with the creative director as well and see which ones work for that. So we try and just cover the full base.
Thank you so much. Next question is here.
Cool. Hey, guys. What was the highest and the lowest poly counts for characters? And I guess just generally the kind of the boundaries you had for the poly count for the characters. Yeah, thank you.
So I knew that question was coming. I have a paper here with all this. No, I mean, we don't actually show some of the stuff, and Kratos it's kind of high on the poly count because he always close to camera. We don't LOD him that very often, but we just kind of work on the mentality of things being clean. I think that's the most important. We don't have a lot of limitations on the poly count. I mean, we do. We can't go crazy, but as long as they're clean and they're within the necessary, then it's fine. We work closely with TechArt just to understand, where is that line, but we don't have a lot of, clear guideline for each. It depends on each character. The snake, even being that size, it's on the low poly count line, but yeah, I can answer that question, but I kind of did, but I don't know.
Thank you, Raf. Next question is back here.
So obviously you guys are working in a digital medium, but what role, if any, do traditional mediums play in your guys' creative process?
Just repeat the last part.
What part did the traditional mediums play in the process?
Yeah, traditional clay or
ba-
paint.
A little bit of like you saw some sketches, you saw some maquettes, that kind of stuff. On the VizDev side, most of our stuff is done in Photoshop, but as you saw, we have Stephen Oakley, who just loves sketching. I do some sketching myself. Since I'm the lead, I kind of make time for the artist to do that. From my point of view, what the success for me is if we get the most ideas in the quickest amount of time. In contrast to Stephen, Jose goes into final paintings right away, and that's how he works the best. I try and set it up with my team in a way that's the most proficient for us. We can start that way, but obviously we have to make it all in primary digital as we go forward.
Yeah, same thing for the character. I mean, when we had more time pre-production, I was doing more of the maquettes just to get the idea through the team and just for us, again, just to understand what we were doing. But as you move into production, we don't have a lot of time for that stuff. So.
But the core fundamentals remain the same throughout, so.
I like to do traditional, so I don't know. I just try to fit it in.
Okay, so can someone pass the mic down for me?
So number one, thank you so much for coming, guys. This is amazing. Absolutely, thank you for sharing so much.
Thanks, man.
I wanted to ask, as far as like a character like ATREUS, for example, how do you guys decide how much of like Faye and how much of Kratos to put in his character, and how to balance that out?
A lot of the stuff is the early explorations and seeing how much is too much. And then it's mostly on the viz dev and then talking to the director, because a lot of the times that doesn't come from him or from the narrative. It's just us trying to even kind of explain for ourselves how we can make it happen. And
I think the best thing is once you actually see it, because you can kind of talk about the ideas, but once you actually see it, you can be like, oh, this is working a little better, or this one isn't. The thing I think you need to kind of keep in mind is, let's say you've got 5 ideas you want in this character. What you got to do is kind of create a hierarchy. Which one is the most important? Which one's secondary? Which one's tertiary? Because if you have them all reading at the same time, it's going to really split the view and like the way the characters see, and then they'll be competing, and none of those will actually stand up. So we knew that he's half Kratos, half ATREUS, or half Faye, and so that both of those were represented equally on him, and that's an influence on who he becomes. The best thing is just kind of putting pencil to paper for us.
And this is a good example because that one kind of, with a lot of the other ones, it kind of happens when someone have an idea in the VizDev team, and then we say, you know, I have this idea, what do you think of this? And then that inspires people to just create based on that, and that's how things evolved into the production. But
yes, and I think especially at our studio, the collaboration is huge. I've said in the past, but we really need to be able to work with each other in the most productive manner, and I think that yields the best stuff. So.
And Corey is a very story-driven guy as well, so those type of ideas is what gets him motivated and get him to buy off on some of the designs that we have. So.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And then was there a second question near here? Okay, I thought I saw one.
Hey guys, amazing work, of course.
Thanks.
I have 2 questions. First one is, the God of War series usually has enormous enemies that, you know, Kratos has fought throughout the games. And when you see Baldur, which is the main enemy of this game, he looks almost, you know, kind of a wimp compared to what you had before. He's not as imposing as Kratos or anything. Was that some sort of like designed idea to have him some sort of like an antithesis to Kratos? And the second question is going a little bit into spoilers, but at the end of the game, there is this big reveal about Atreus' nature. Was that an idea that was incorporated on his design from the beginning, or it was like more of an afterthought? You guys didn't think very much about it.
All right, 2 simple questions. So the first one with Baldur, yeah, initially we intended that for his design. when he sees Kratos and he comes to his house in the beginning, you're like, this guy's gonna get his claw cleaned by Kratos. The same way like the greatest Jedi was Yoda, right? You played against expectations. That's something we wanted to do, and you can even see that when you first fight him, he's just called the stranger. There's no information about him. We wanted that story to unravel. We wanted you to see who you were fighting in the beginning and not realize that that's gonna be your guy at the end. So again, that visual art kind of complemented what we were doing with the narrative and the gameplay.
And then in playing with expectations, I think that was a theme throughout the entire game. So that's kind of how that played out. You know, having the past gods being a lot of gold, a lot of armors. Like this one it's the opposite. You know, like Dela said, is like kind of the biker vibe.
And I think to me that's actually what we were trying to do is add a little depth to all the characters. And if you saw someone who was bigger than Kratos come to the door, you're like, okay, I know how this guy's going to fight. If you see someone who isn't, that can go toe to Kratos with Kratos, it's more unexpected on how he's going to do it. And I think it offers more visual interest and story interest that way.
And
the unexpected elements of it.
The second part of the question is that, so we knew from the beginning what the end of the game was going to be, so we try to add the little hints into the design, and as even the kid progressed through the game, you start seeing more of that, you know, through all his costuming, the way he acts and all that. So it's a big collaboration between narrative, Corey as the creative director, and us trying to get, but there's a lot of the stuff that even Corey wants to add into the designs. So even if we don't know per se, like he just forces us into like add these little hints here and there.
Yeah, and that was something I think we didn't know at the beginning.
All right, so we have one last question, I think. I'm going to go on this side. Right here.
Oh dear. Hey guys, you made some really visually stunning characters and they all tell a story. How long on average was the exploration stage before you thought, okay, we can start putting this character into production?
So yeah, that was a big one. That was a huge process because when we started designing the cast, we didn't know where each character was going to show up or introductions where they were going to happen. And every enemy can appear anywhere in the game. And it's a big game, you know, 30 plus hours, lots of exploration. So like we didn't knew from the beginning and we didn't really care that much. That kind of came through with animation when they start introducing those characters and kind of placing into the game. And that changed many times. So we had a list of like all the characters, where they're going to show up, maybe what they're going to do when they show up. But that was very up in the air until the end.
Yeah, a lot of it, you know, it varies depending on the character. A lot of what we're designing with mythology or Norse mythology, things that don't exist, things that are abstract. So if you design a human, you know what the ankle is, you know what the elbow is, and the hand, the fingers, and when you get into some of the creatures and stuff, those all have to be designed out and figure out what those elements are. It changes. There's something like the DRAUGR went maybe over a month of design, and then when we're into production, it can be a day. So it all depends.
Yep.
All right, let's have a big round of applause, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you.